Hello and welcome to the Enterprise Talk Conversation Series, a peer knowledge resource by the CXOs for the CXOs. Now to our host, Kanika Goswami.
Hello and welcome to our podcast On Stage with Enterprise Thought Leaders. Today we have with us Mr. Deepak Visweswaraiah, the Vice President of Platform Engineering and Site Managing Director, Pegasystems. Welcome to our podcast, Deepak, and I'm sorry about that glitch in pronouncing your surname.
No worries at all. No worries at all. Happens to me all the time.
So a little bit about Deepak. He's been in the industry for over 3 decades. As a leader in the technology industry, he's passionate in building large engineering organizations and driving innovation and bringing products into global markets. His extensive experience in establishing global in-house centers, and we will ask you about this in a bit, for multinational companies, leverages a significant time spent both in the US and in India. So currently you're working in India, right? Deepak is also passionate about building next generation technologies, transformative approach, business leadership and mentoring startups. And when he's not doing all of this, he's into golf, I hear.
There you go.
Now, a little bit about Pegasystems as well. It's a software company based out of Cambridge in Massachusetts. The company provides the world's leading organizations with a dynamic low-code platform that enables them to be agile and ready to adapt to change. The AI-powered decisioning and workflow automation made by Pega are utilized by customers to address their most critical business concerns, from personalizing engagement to automating service and streamlining operations. So I have a very quick question here, Deepak, before we launch with the main questions.
Yeah.
You're talking about low-code platforms. So these are the technology platforms that encourage citizen development, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So that's an interesting thing we can probably add to what we are going to be discussing now, because that's taking care of a lot of cost optimization and efficiency, and as of course agility as well, right, for organizations.
Absolutely. I think you hit it right on the money. It definitely addresses all three of those areas, and we can certainly talk more about it. That's essentially what Pegasystems does, right? We provide a platform on top of which a lot of our clients develop applications. Instead of being able to build applications from scratch, which will take months or years, you can actually go build an application in weeks, for that matter, to be in days or weeks to be so much more efficient, especially in these days. Right? So
Yeah, and also probably skill costs are a little less because it does not require very complex skills to use local.
correct. So you don't need people to know in depth, in terms of design, architecture, and coding knowledge as such, because the idea is that they use this platform to be able to use the visual editors and visual way of being able to lay out the processes, building out all the things that are required, and to deploy the applications, including it being in a cloud environment, a cloud native environment, and what have you. It can all actually be done through that platform without having to really write much code at all. So that definitely helps from a skill point of view. It makes it so much more easier. Not only just more easier, it also brings two things. One, it's an alternate career, if you will, for people who don't necessarily have that depth in understanding from a technology perspective, right? And secondly, it allows the business knowledge to come in. So somebody who has the business knowledge to build an application, that they actually have all the knowledge of. How do you bring that into into a product and build a product or build an application is so much more easier. They understand the business side, and this is a very easy environment to build an application, and they can marry the two from requirements to be able to deploy, and they can take it through in a platform like what we offer.
Right. What role will generative AI tools play in this?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? So much is being talked about in the industry today about what generative AI does, right? And how is it revolutionizing the technology that we have today and accelerating what we refer to as typically, digital transformation or driving organizations to what we refer to as an autonomous, enterprise. Essentially, if you think about an autonomous enterprise, it's an organization that is self-optimizing that applies a lot of artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques to be able to automate their decisioning, automate their operations, to be able to improve any kind of services that they offer across the organization, right? It's essentially, think of it as a shift in the mindset that people think about it in terms of from how do they approach technology. That in itself is a shift in reference to that, right? So in this context, really, artificial intelligence and people have to learn and guide, each other. It's not any one thing overtaking the other, but it's about being able to drive together to make that happen, right? Lots of improvements in generative AI technologies that have happened especially in the last 6 to 12 months have significantly accelerated this journey, whether from a digital transformation perspective or what have you. If we just think about it in terms of some of the data points, right? From recently, Financial Times actually wrote about this, right? That the investments in generative AI alone in 2022, just in 1 year, exceeded $2 billion, right? So businesses are really investing in this technology and their ability to be able to automate, to gain momentum in terms of just exploring the possibilities to create, whether that is what we refer to as autonomous, self-sustaining digital enterprises in that sense, right? If you look at it in terms of what Gartner has to say, early foundation models, like when we talk about generative AI, we always refer to LLMs, which are the large language models that that provide that capability, right? Like ChatGPT, they focus on the ability of the generative AI as such to create, make sure that we create, creative work. I mean, right? Essentially, I think Gartner says by 2025 we expect probably more than 30%, which is kind of zero today, right? From 0 to 30% of the new drugs that are developed in the market. That's a great example in terms of a concrete example. If we can actually say 30% of new drugs that come into the market are discovered and brought to market through generative AI techniques, by 2025, which is just a couple of years away, right? That's an incredible impact that it can actually create. And so it does look to, what we, my opinion is that generative AI really empowers companies to streamline, to be able to, deal with complex systems more effortlessly, right? It can also help automate and optimize various processes within the IT realm, for that matter, right? Enabling businesses to, what you referred to earlier as a greater efficiency, and productivity, what have you. Like, a simple example could be in terms of being able to generate, one of the big things that generative AI does is to be able to generate code. So you can ask it to, generate some code, and then you could potentially use that, although you have to be careful in terms of how you use it, where you use it, what you use it for, all of that. It can generate scripts, it can summarize things for you, it can write emails for you, it can write, so many other applications that there are, which we can, really talk about, right? We are witnessing such application of generative AI in various areas, like different areas. I talked about healthcare, right? Talk about medicine, talk about product R&D, talk about finance, especially. I think fintech and overall finance banking is a huge area for where that is applicable. A lot of back office operations, logistics, transportation, you name it pretty much, and where it can actually be applicable, and we could leverage. When you look at in terms of marrying artificial intelligence, and machine learning with a focus on automation, you really look at it in terms of having enterprise agility that potentially can drive itself. That's kind of the impact that we are looking at from generative AI.
So, two more questions with reference to the use of generative AI in low-code platforms and in industry in general. Number one is you did mention that there are probably risks involved. So, what would you rate as a top challenges there? And number two is, do you think organizations with the legacy infrastructure will find it an uphill task to adopt it adequately so that it can give them the maximum results? And if yes, then how does Pega help them do that? So you can answer them both together or mix them up or answer separately or as you wish.
Yeah, so maybe we'll break that up into two. Let's talk a little bit about the risks in terms of what generative AI brings, and just like any other new technology, everything when it comes, there is always some inherent risk with all technologies. Generative AI certainly has its risks too, right? However, the impact of generative AI, because it is so close to human, let's say, for example, how well it can actually create images of humans, how closely can it come to generative voice of humans, how well it can come to being able to show or be empathetic to a human act, for example, right? Whether that is any kind of a bot, any kind of an automated software, whatever it may be, right? So the fact that generative AI tools are trained on massive amounts of image and text data, right? These are all it essentially learns from what we feed into the models of generative AI, right? So it gets it from multiple sources. So it's as good as the sources that it gets from, right? That's where the risk comes from. When the tools create images or let's say generate lines of code, it all depends on the source that it is taken from, and it potentially forms bias based on where that comes from. Let's say, for example, if you feed it data purely from let's say United States, okay, so it's obviously designed to be able to be biased, to think about the entire world is United States. So if it may be talking to somebody in India, which can be completely different as to how it approaches a conversation, right? So I think that is one of the bigger things in terms of the risk that comes from. There's certainly plenty of other areas, whether it is technical, compliance, legal risks that generative AI brings to various corporations, right? I was reading a recent report by a company called Team 8, which is an Israeli venture firm for that matter, right? And where they identify there are risks that are high risks and a medium category of risks, right? So there are things in terms of high level of risks where especially you're concerned about data privacy and confidentiality of PII, personal information, in terms of whether it is people's phone numbers or other personal details, right? In terms of what is considered as PII. Now, you don't want to, when you leverage AI models, you don't want to share your client data, you don't want to share your employees' data all into a public system or a model that you are using, because that actually gets trained on that data, and that data potentially is available to others and can get exposed, and through which there are a huge amount of risks, right? Very similar in terms of how an enterprise software or software as a service works. Things like third-party security of such non-public or enterprise data will always will be considered at risk, right? The other things in terms of behavioral vulnerabilities, such as when we leverage generative AI models, we always we give it what we call as prompts. That's the question that we ask the generative AI models, to which it actually responds. So how do you interject or how does that get interpreted in the model in itself is also something that holds some risk from an enterprise data perspective, right? And of course there are legal and regulatory compliance. These are really some things that we look at as high risks. There are also medium level of risks in terms of how does it aid, or let's say, for example, people who do things for for their own good, as far as evolution of attacks, in terms of whether it is a phishing attack, whether it is frauds, whether it is social engineering, with things like that. How does that get accelerated with the AI/ML models, or with the generative AI models, or what have you? How does copyright and ownership kind of issues where, so let's say, for example, somebody's used something in terms of, it could be a code snippet that is generated by a generative AI model. It could be an image that is created. It could be any such object or thing that is created, right? So those kind of things are also considered as medium risks. I referred to bias and discrimination depending on the training earlier. That's there again, whether it is trust and especially corporate reputation, right? How does somebody maintain that, and then the risks to that. So those are probably major areas of risk that companies do struggle with in terms of being able to leverage generative AI. But all of these are being addressed, I'm sure, as we go about, as companies adopt these technologies, we'll also sort out some of these risks as well as we go. Okay, so that talks about the risks. I think you had another question about
legacy infrastructure. So how do organizations work with the legacy infrastructure? What are the changes they have to bring, or what are the modifications required for being able to optimize low-code platforms, even when they have a legacy infrastructure?
Correct. Yeah. So this is a common problem in the industry, and then different segments of the industry could be in different levels of maturity as far as what we refer to maybe as modernization, or lack of that results in legacy systems, for that matter, right? So often enough, companies, it's always hard to keep, technology keeps changing, technology keeps improving every 6 months, every year. So if you think about any product that is adopted by an organization, there are new versions of that product. There are new features or functionalities that are coming in. Nowadays, it's not even once in 3 months or 6 months or what have you. If you are actually using software which is offered as a service that is on some form of cloud infrastructure or what have you, changes can actually come in at any point in time. In terms of, there are companies that make weekly releases, there are companies that make bi-weekly or monthly or what have you. That's what we refer to as an agile and a scaled agile infrastructure, or methodology of working, where the new development of feature and functionalities can actually get deployed automatically and very quickly. Now, what happens in companies that are not in that path, to be able to adapt such technologies, they get left behind in terms of where they have implemented a system, whether it is on-prem or whatever, and haven't changed it for a long while for various reasons, and they get stuck in this whole legacy form as far as where they need. So it is very important. This is typically on top of CIOs' minds. Most of the CIOs that I talk to will say this is one of the things they worry about. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the CIOs have actually moved towards being able to leverage cloud native systems that are offered as a service. So they don't need to maintain their own infrastructure. They don't need to worry about upgrading and being able to modernize their either their systems or the software that are applications that they work on, right? So they leverage what is offered, and it's the vendor's prerogative, and it's the vendor's responsibility to be able to keep the systems up and running, to keep the systems current, and be able to adopt newer features and functionalities that they develop, right? So, but there are a lot of companies, like you said, who are stuck in that legacy time frame and legacy systems. And what can they do? They can certainly there are some strategies that they can surely use to be able to modernize their systems, to be able to keep current with technology, right? A couple of the things on my mind in terms of that I would want to share. One, potentially assess, the current workflows and technology options that they have, right? If you begin by thoroughly looking at and analyzing and documenting your existing workflows and understand areas where you can automate and what can give you the significant benefit out of that is probably one place to start with, right? Once you start, you probably think, should look at how do you start automating the low impact systems, right? Begin your automation journey by dealing with those low impact processes or tasks that you identify, and that will allow a group or an organization to really gain some experience and with some of the automation tools and build the confidence in the technology so that they can actually, one, demonstrate some tangible output, and secondly, to be able to get familiar and be able to take on more complex workflows as they move forward, right? Thirdly, you look at being able to migrate your legacy systems to the cloud native, type of operations. That's what I talked about earlier. So you don't really have to worry about aging infrastructure. You don't have to worry about when do I upgrade what application and, how do I upgrade? Does it, need downtime, and, how do you coordinate all of that? That's all taken care by vendors, right? And then fourth, I would say, there is always value in prioritizing those automation opportunities. If you find 10 workflows, you figure out which ones actually give you the biggest returns, and you prioritize those in that order, and be able to look at some vectors as what gives you efficiency, what gives you cost reduction, what gives you better user experience, what have you, and decide your priorities based on that. And lastly, I would also say, leverage something, a low-code platform, a low-code, no-code platform like what Pega has to offer. Not necessarily as a plug-in to Pega, but it makes people's life so much more easier. It makes an IT organization's life so much more easier. They can really be very agile in leveraging some of these low-code, no-code platforms to build their applications and keep them current. And not get into that legacy issues, where they face an uphill task of being able to really rip and replace and do it over years. Typically, once you accumulate that debt, in order to really get over it, you end up spending, multiple years to implement a new system that is more modern and helpful, right? So
Yeah.
I hope that answers a little bit of that.
Yes,
question.
quite a bit, sir. Not little bit.
Yeah.
So I have just one last question. We are quoting the godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton. He recently quit Google so that he could openly speak about the risks of AI without hampering Google's reputation. Moreover, other various industry veterans like Elon Musk and many others have suggested a ban on AI in one form or the other. The government is exploring opportunities to regulate it. Do you think the situation warrants such strong action, or do you think industry players themselves should be able to, come to maybe a common structure of how AI should be used, and what should generically be decided that they will not do this or they will not step over these boundaries or whatever? What is your opinion? I know US is planning to put certain regulations in place on AI, and probably to fight maybe unethical elements who are out to make money at the cost of humanity or industry or whatever. We can make all those dramatic statements here.
Sure.
But being in the industry, what do you think? Is a strong regulation required, or the industry can take care of its own?
Yeah, I think innovation really, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, right? Innovation comes because the industry is allowed to do what it is allowed to do, right? You can, it becomes very difficult to be able to bring innovation to that forefront and really make such great improvements in the industry. If you put a stranglehold on the industry, right? In my opinion, right? To me, I mean, this is like a pendulum swinging, right? You either go one extreme or the other extreme. Of course, there is always different opinions, right? In terms of, there is always some who are conservationists, there are always liberal, people in terms going at the two extremes, right? Ban on something like artificial intelligence in a tech savvy world, to me, is almost unthinkable in my personal opinion. I think it just takes away the entire aspect of innovation, right? The passion that, by which we all work towards in being able to do things, I think will be taken away. I personally feel that can only hurt the progress we make, in this world through technology. However, I think you brought up a good point, right? Finding that right balance between the trust in attribution and the human oversight, that can be a significant challenge, but that's really what we ought to achieve, right? Just banning AI, is one extreme, or governing everything we do is another extreme, right? What we look at in terms of, if you look at the lack of transparency in AI models, that is what can result in severe, harm or severe penalties to organizations' reputation. Like, for example, if we were to offer a product that uses something and that is put into a negative use in the world, yeah, absolutely, and an organization can have an incredible, impact on its reputation, right? If you think about AI governance that you referred to, right? The idea is what? The idea is to be able to establish accountability. The idea is to be able to establish responsibility, and an oversight in terms of making sure that ethically the AI usage is transparent and it is used for the right reasons, right? So in my opinion, I think we should ask organizations, and I believe organizations are capable, and we do it today, that they must put guardrails around the development and productization of processes or AI models, to ensure the trustworthiness of the AI models, to ensure the transparency of the AI models. When you provide the transparency in AI models, the user or whoever is using it knows why the model works the way it works, and what can I do to make it work right to my use case or what have you, right? That gives that transparency gives much better control in the industry, rather than banning everything, right? Yes, some level of governance may be okay, and those can be actually built by organizations, built by the industry, and I don't think it has to be a government mandated type of thing for that matter, right? So keeping up with latest developments in AI technology, as crucial as it is, including the ethical challenges, including the technical solutions, all of that will actually help us in keeping the innovation really going, right? And we can mitigate some of these risks associated with AI governance with practices, with good practices, both from a workforce skilling. We want to be able to teach our people, everyone in terms of what is the best way to use these things, what are the right ways to use these things, what is ethical, what is unethical, and many other things in terms of how do we really promote trustworthy artificial intelligence usage as such in the industry, right? So I think that's my personal opinion. Let's say I'm very, very passionate about it, but that's my personal opinion.
But that is right. So we hope that companies and brands themselves have some boundary where they think they will not cross as far as ethics are concerned, and that should be good enough. So we don't need something like a GDPR for AI.
Exactly. Yeah, that's definitely what I think, because otherwise we stifle the innovation that we are making. I think it has an incredible opportunity in various different domains. This is probably one of those technologies that has such a wide impact. You think about whether it is how the humanity will benefit from applying all of this technology in healthcare. How much it can actually help in terms of even a new age domain like a fintech, for example, right? the whole impact of how neobanks, for example, which will probably never have a branch that you can walk into. It is completely digital for that matter. How they can actually use this and offer for experience. How even a fundamental domain, like transportation or logistics, can actually use something like this technology, right? I think it'll be a huge impact on innovation if we don't allow that to prosper.
Our podcast is going to be heard by 1.3 million leaders worldwide, so I'm guessing somebody will take it up with you going forward. Thank you so much. Thanks, Deepak, for the time you spared for us and the very interesting conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Karika. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being with us. Please do follow us on social media for regular updates and new content.